and welcome to EarthFile. I am Ayola Kasim. Over 190 nations agreed on the building blocks of a new Star Global Deal due in 2015 to combat climate change amid warnings that far tougher action will be needed to limit rising world temperatures. Under the Lima deal, agreed on Sunday, the 14th of December, governments will submit national plans for reining in greenhouse gas emissions by an informal deadline of 31st of March 2015 to form the basis of a global agreement due at a summit in Paris in a year's time. But it was not a smooth ride for participants as they had to extend the talks before an agreement was reached. The talks, which opened with hopes for new momentum after a climate deal between China and the United States last month, focused on the scope of pledges that countries are due to make early next year to tackle the warming. Options discussed in Lima range from requiring nations to publish a vague outline of their carbon plans on the United Nations website to making all provide detailed projections in terms of greenhouse gas emissions that will be reviewed by experts.
The loss and damage issue, which, as you know, if you've been tracking the Cannes press conferences, is a high priority for Climate Action Network. The way that is reflected in the text now is as part of adaptation. It says adaptation including loss and damage rather than adaptation, comma, loss and damage. And of course, that's a very hard-fought issue. The United States and other countries would prefer to see loss and damage just as part of the adaptation pillar of the process, whereas the small island states, LDCs, and others insist that it should be a separate topic, not merged in with adaptation.
Under the deal announced with the United States, China has promised its emissions will peak around 2030, for instance, but may not give the exact numbers and opposes the idea of review by other countries. The United States favors a review, but is not insisting that countries should be willing to toughen their plans if challenged.
We have no time for lengthy new negotiations, and I think we all know that. I'm not saying that there are no modifications by the presidency possible, but we must be mindful that this text represents a hard-won balance and that the hourglass is running down. The success of this COP in Lima is at stake. The success of next year's COP in Paris is at stake. And indeed, I think the future of the UNFCCC as the body to address climate change effectively at the international level is also at stake. Failing to produce the decision before us will be seen as a major breakdown and will deal a serious blow to the confidence of parties and others as we approach Paris, and indeed to the hope of a Paris Agreement. All that we have achieved thus far will be at risk, and all we hope to achieve will be at risk as well.
The European Union and many developing nations want detailed accounting by all and a strong review.
In the EU, we agreed to find a balance between the several options which are mentioned in the text up to now. And I think it was a very wise position of the COP presidency to give several options in a range from A to Z, and we will find a balance in the middle. And the EU and Germany is ready to do so.
A recent UN report said governments could keep climate change in check at manageable costs, but will have to cut greenhouse gas emissions to zero by 2100 to limit fast worsening risk. The 40-page synthesis, summing up 5,000 pages of work by 800 scientists already published since September 2013, said global warming was now causing more heat extremes, downpours acidifying the oceans and pushing up sea levels. The UN's weather agency said record high ocean temperatures will make 2014 the hottest year on record, or at least among the very warmest, in evidence of a long-term trend of global warming.
Comparing January to October 2014 to earlier years, if November and December maintain the same global temperature anomaly value, the best estimates for 2014, according to this measure, would place it as the warmest year on record.
Including this year, 14 of the 15 most sweltering years on record will have been in the 21st century.
And if we do nothing, then by the end of the century, you can see the substantial decrease in yields that would take place. And with a growing population and higher incomes, you can imagine food scarcity and food security and the whole issue of starvation and hunger become very large threats.
Reliable temperature records stretch back to the 1850s. If temperatures stay similarly above normal for the rest of the year, 2014 will likely be the hottest on record, ahead of 2010, 2005, and 1998.
One of the big indicators of how the climate is changing is in sea surface temperatures anomalies. In the top diagram, we indicate the sea surface temperature anomalies from January to October of 2014, which were about 0.45 degrees Celsius above the 1961 to 1990 average.
Thank you, Claire.
But the head of the United Nations Climate Change Secretariat said the change is clear and the oceans are paying a price for it.
The heat is being absorbed by the oceans. There is no doubt that the ocean continues to warm, and that on a very, very consistent basis. And what it is doing, frankly, is doing us a little favor. They are absorbing the heat that could have gone to the land and paying the price.
This year is said to be the warmest on record, and the scenarios by a United Nations panel of scientists indicate that the world should get on track to slash emissions to a net zero before 2100.
The first priority that they would have to do with or without money from the north is to spend money on adaptation and loss and damage. There will be very little money or no money at all for mitigation. And I think this reality has to be understood, because you have no choice but to respond to the floods and the crises and the hurricanes and the typhoons.
As the summit drew to a close, the COP20 venue was flooded by a flash mob of environmentalists who demanded action to stop global warming.
We also preparing us to confront the impacts of climate change.
Members from the International Development Group, Oxfam, staged a demonstration calling on leaders attending the climate talks to take urgent action in a joint effort to fight climate change.
We can't go inside and say, we want to reduce emissions, we want to have a better future, we want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, and then go back home and start exploiting the tar sands.
I'm here to call on the U.S. government to start taking action at home to keep our commitments to 2 degrees Celsius global temperature rise limit, and to take that fight home and translate that into rejecting fossil fuel infrastructure and investing in renewable energy infrastructure.
Demonstrators donned massive heads crafted to look like key world leaders and loaded boxes labeled solutions to climate change into a makeshift boat symbolically bound for Paris in reference to the COP21 conference that is to be held in the French capital in 2015.
Is calling on world leaders to find solutions to climate change within the context of a global agreement. So you can see the boat is heading towards Paris, and the boat is asking world leaders to find solutions to climate change. So you will see the balloons, the black balloons, they're representing the world's emissions. And we're asking world leaders to find solutions to the growing problem of emissions